Hello and welcome back to Mystery of Israel Radio, the program that focuses on God's outstanding promises to Paul's kinsmen according to the flesh, the program that focuses on the cost of Israel's rejection of Messiah and the future glory of their acceptance in him. For the past 3 or 4 weeks, we've been in Daniel chapter 9, and we're going to continue to be in chapter 9, talking about the 77s that were decreed for Daniel's people and his holy city, Jerusalem. The answer to Daniel's crying out about the end of the 70 years of exile in Babylon. So let's just read those 4 or 5 verses again regarding the 77s. And I want to just back up a little bit and talk a little bit more about the 70 years that are being concluded. So Daniel chapter 9, verse 24. 77s are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment, or the word, to restore and to build Jerusalem, unto the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. And after 62 sevens shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 7, and in the midst of the 7 he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So let's talk about these 77s and the starting point of them. So Daniel is at the tail end of the 70-year exile, where he has been subject to the kingdom of Babylon for almost his entire life. And so I'd like to back up to the very end of the book of Chronicles to read the account of the desolation of Jerusalem and God's promise to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. And I'd also like to look at a prophecy that Isaiah made 150 years before regarding the identity of the person whom God had chosen to set in motion that rebuilding, that restoration. So let's go back to 2 Chronicles chapter 36, starting in verse 15. It says, And the Lord God of their fathers sent to them by his messengers, rising up betimes and sending, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they mocked the messengers of God, and despised his words, and misused his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord arose against his people, till there was no remedy. Therefore he brought upon them the king of the Chaldees, who slew their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion upon young man or maiden, old man or him that stooped for age. He gave them all into his hand, and all the vessels of the house of God, great and small, and the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king and of his princes, all these he brought to Babylon. And they burnt the house of God, and brake down the wall of Jerusalem, and burnt all the palaces thereof with fire, and destroyed all the goodly vessels thereof. And them that had escaped from the sword carried he away to Babylon, where they were servants to him and his sons until the reign of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths. For as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath, to fulfill 70 years, or 70 years. So I would like to turn also, before we read the conclusion of this chapter, I would like to turn to the prophet Isaiah, who prophesied to Israel long before the desolation of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. Yet Isaiah saw that Babylon was going to come and bring judgment to the nation of Israel. And what's more astonishing is that he saw the restoration and the identity of the person that would set the restoration of Israel into motion. And we'll find this in Isaiah chapter 44 at the very end, where it says in verse 24, "Thus saith the Lord thy Redeemer, and he that formed thee from the womb, I am the Lord that maketh all things, that stretcheth forth the heavens alone, that spreadeth abroad the earth by myself, that frustrateth the tokens of the liars, and maketh diviners mad, that turneth wise men backward, and maketh their knowledge foolish, that confirmeth the word of his servant, and performeth the counsel of his messengers, that saith to Jerusalem, Thou shalt be inhabited, and to the cities of Judah, You shall be built. And I will raise up the decayed places thereof, that saith to the deep, Be dry, and I will dry up thy rivers, that saith of Cyrus, He is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, Thou shalt be built, and to the temple, Thy foundation shall be laid. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him, and I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. I will go before thee, and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass, and cut in sunder the bars of iron. Verse 4, For Jacob, my servant's sake, and Israel, mine elect, I have even called thee by thy name. I have surnamed thee, though thou hast not known me. So 150 years before its fulfillment, the prophet Isaiah prophesied. And so I'm flipping back to 2 Chronicles, and it says in verse 22 of chapter 36, Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, All the kingdoms of the earth hath the Lord God of heaven given me, and he hath charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is there among you of his people? The Lord his God be with him, and let him go up. And when you turn the page, it begins the book of Ezra and starts in the same way. And when you turn the page to the book of Ezra, it says the same thing. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. Verse 3, Who is there among you of his people? his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord God of Israel. So let's look at this judgment of Jerusalem that lasted for 70 years. They mocked God's messengers, despised his words, and scoffed at his prophets until the wrath of the Lord was aroused against his people, and there was no remedy. So God judged the nation of Israel by turning them over to the Babylonians for 70 years, for rejecting the words of the prophets. So here is Daniel, who is getting a fresh revelation of God's purposes for Israel. And God is promising that after 7 sevens, and I believe those 7 sevens, the 49 years, started with this decree from Cyrus and ended with the building of the walls of Jerusalem, completing the building of the temple and the restoration of the city of Jerusalem after much trouble, after the 7 sevens, and then the 62 sevens when Messiah came, not just one of God's messengers, but God's only begotten Son. God the Father sent his Son to his beloved nation, to Israel first, and his own received him not. So after 62 sevens, Messiah was cut off, but not for himself, it says in Daniel. So if the rejection of the word of the Lord through the prophets resulted in 70 years of exile in the land of Babylon, what kind of punishment would we expect with the rejection of God's own Son, the express image of God in flesh? We're going to look more at this in our next session or two. We're going to look at that 70th seven, about which it says, "And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he," and we're going to have to look and see who this he is, "he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 7, and in the midst of the 7 he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate." We're going to look at the last 7. What kind of period of chastisement might be between this cutting off of Messiah and the consummation of all things, the restoration, the promised restoration of Israel. These are things worthy of our meditations. So until next time, this is Mystery of Israel Radio.